We have before us the opportunity to forge for ourselves and for future generations a new world order, a world where the rule of law, not the law of the jungle, governs the conduct of nations. When we are successful, and we will be, we have a real chance at this new world order, an order in which a credible United Nations can use its peacekeeping role to fulfill the promise and vision of the UN's founding.
It's no secret that a massive shift in global economic power is underway from west to east. But the question is whether the old developed economies are ready for the consequences of that change.
We've got to give them a stake in creating the kind of world order that I think all of us would like to see.
Are we at one of those moments in history in which there is the necessity for a new world order? A, because of what's taken place in the Middle East, the rise of different kinds of groups, and B, what's happened in Asia, meaning that there has been a shift from the west to the east.
There's a need for a new world order, but it has different characteristics in different parts of the world.
Are you optimistic a global system can happen from what we've heard so far?
It could happen, and in fact it's in the works.
Issues, but they really are issues of the construction of a new world order. That's what this is about, and that's the sort of dialogue the Chinese are generally good at. And so a partnership between us is essential. A conflict between us is going to exhaust us both in tactical exercises that cannot be conclusive.
Order could satisfy both.
It has to satisfy both, because otherwise it will lead to tensions that will exhaust us both.
Much of the turmoil we see on the planet today is a response to a power shift of rising economic prosperity from the west to the east. 3/4 of the world's energy resources are in Eurasia, and whoever ultimately controls these resources will lead the world into a new era of consolidation, a new world order. Regime change in the name of democracy and the war on terror has placed the United States and its allies in key strategic Eurasian regions. Welcome to the birth pangs of a new world order.
Leaders and dignitaries of the European Union, representatives of our NATO alliance, distinguished guests. We meet here at a moment of testing for Europe and the United States, and for the international order that we have worked for generations to build.
Never before has a new world order had to be assembled from so many different perceptions, or on so global a scale. Nor has any previous order had to combine the attributes of the historic balance of power system with global democratic opinion and the exploding technology of the contemporary period.
This is the world you are graduating into. This is what I want to talk about today with you for a few minutes. I believe we, and particularly you, your class, has an incredible window of opportunity to lead in shaping a new world order for the 21st century in a way consistent with American interest and the common interest.
These troubled times, our fifth objective, a new world order can emerge, a new era, freer from the threat of terror, stronger in the pursuit of justice, and more secure in the quest for peace. An era in which the nations of the world, East and West, North and South, can prosper and live in harmony. 100 generations have searched for this elusive path to peace, while 1,000 wars raged across the span of human endeavor. And today that new world is struggling to be born. A world quite different from the one we've known. A world where the rule of law supplants the rule of the jungle. A world in which nations recognize the shared responsibility for freedom and justice.
A new world order is emerging, and with it the foundations of a new and progressive era of international cooperation. We have resolved that from today we will together manage the process of globalization to secure responsibility from all and fairness to all.
Also exists an extraordinary opportunity to form for the first time in history a truly global society.
I've been a member of this committee for many years, and I have never seen anything as disgraceful and outrageous and despicable as the last demonstration that just took place about, you know, you're going to have to shut up or I'm going to have you arrested.
The ideology of the unification of mankind under one religious, economic and political umbrella has existed since the days of Babylon, when Nimrod built an epicenter of civilization reaching for the sky. United States politicians have demonstrated an almost fanatical zeal in a race against the clock to institute policies asserting US superiority. Nations such as China and Russia are forming re-evaluated alliances and are challenging US hegemony. There is also a religious aspect as well. Behind the scenes, Roman Catholicism has allied itself with the United States and the European elite to ensure Roman Catholicism, with its 1.2 billion members, is the head, not the tail, of the New World Order. Islam is the rival, with almost 1.6 billion members, and fundamentalist sects like the Shiites not willing to be part of any world order.
What for? Well, the purpose is what the Roman Catholic system has all the time as her own purpose, is to infiltrate, to penetrate all the areas of life where the Roman Catholic can have control and access for the coming world government. What that means is, in preparation for that world government, the Roman Catholic institution, especially since the establishment of the Jesuit order in 1541, throughout all these 500 years, they've been in preparation and through infiltration and penetration of every level of society in order to take over the world politically and religiously.
These US politicians are heavily influenced by the military-industrial complex, as well as organisations such as the Council on Foreign Relations and the Bilderberg Group. But the rabbit hole goes deeper than that. US presidents are well aware of the inherent danger of being assassinated by an unseen power if they choose to go against the grain of a well-hidden secret organisation, hell-bent on absolute control. Whom is this hidden power lurking in the shadows? On November the 22nd, at midday, Lee Harvey Oswald, according to 4 US government investigations, shot John F. Kennedy in Dallas, Texas. The assassination of JFK has been enshrouded in mystery ever since the bizarre chain of events that occurred before, during and after the execution of one of the most loved presidents in the history of the United States of America. Let's expose who was behind this action and investigate the motives of a power working covertly to undermine not only the US government, but other nations as well.
The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society, and we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings. We decided long ago that the dangers of excessive and unwarranted concealment of pertinent facts far outweighed the dangers which are cited to justify it. Even today, there is little value in opposing the threat of a closed society by imitating its arbitrary restrictions. Even today, there is little value in ensuring the survival of our nation if our traditions do not survive with it. And there is very grave danger that an announced need for increased security will be seized upon by those anxious to expand its meaning to the very limits of official censorship and concealment. That I do not intend to permit to the extent that it's in my control. And no official of my administration, whether his rank is high or low, civilian or military, should interpret my words here tonight as an excuse to censor the news, to stifle dissent, to cover up our mistakes, or to withhold from the press and the public the facts they deserve to know. For we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies primarily on covert means for expanding its sphere of influence, on infiltration instead of invasion, on subversion instead of elections, on intimidation instead of free choice, on guerrillas by night instead of armies by day. It is a system which has conscripted vast human and material resources into the building of a tightly knit, highly efficient machine that combines military, diplomatic, intelligence, economic, scientific, and political operations. Its preparations are concealed, not published. Its mistakes are buried, not headlined. Its dissenters are silenced, not praised. No expenditure is questioned, no rumor is printed, no secret is revealed.
There were multiple reasons why JFK was assassinated. The Vietnam War, the dismantling of the Federal Reserve, threatening to smash the CIA into 1,000 pieces, and JFK's speech on the separation of church and state, which displeased the hierarchy of the Roman Catholic Church. President Kennedy wanted to withdraw from Vietnam, and he, as president, began to de-escalate American involvement in Southeast Asia, but the superpower group was plotting his murder. Who was the superpower group that has avoided publicity after a myriad of deception all these years? Writer and philosopher Avro Manhattan had this to say: "The political and military origin of the War of Vietnam has been described with millions of written and spoken words, yet nothing has been said about one of the most significant forces which contributed to its promotion, namely the role played by religion, which in this case means the part played by the Catholic Church and a diplomatic counterpart, the Vatican. Their active participation is not mere speculation. It is an historical fact as concrete as the presence of the US or the massive guerrilla resistance of Asian communism. The activities of the last two have been scrutinized by thousands of books, but the former has never been assessed, not even in the summarized form. The Catholic Church must be considered as their main promoter in the origin, escalation and prosecution of the Vietnamese conflict. From the very beginning, this religious motivation helped set in motion the avalanche that was to cause endless agonies in the Asiatic and the American continent. The military arm of the Vatican, the Jesuits, who controlled politicians in Washington, wanted to continue the war in Vietnam, set up a Catholic power in Southeast Asia, and maintain their control of the international drug market that the Jesuits had held for over 400 years in the Far East. When President Kennedy stood in their way, he had to be removed. The Jesuits had John F. Kennedy assassinated. The day after Kennedy was killed, the decision to stop America's involvement in Vietnam was reversed, and the Vatican program continued. President Diem of Vietnam was a practicing Catholic who ruled South Vietnam with an iron fist. He was a genuine believer of the evils of communism and the uniqueness of the Catholic Church, and had originally been planted in the presidency by Cardinal Spellman and Pope Pius XII. He transformed the presidency into a virtual Catholic dictatorship, ruthlessly crushing his religious and political opponents. Many Buddhist monks committed suicide by self-immolation, dousing themselves with petrol and setting themselves on fire, protesting against the religious persecution of non-Catholics by the South Vietnamese pro-Catholic presidency. President Diem's discriminatory persecution of Buddhists caused mass desertions in the army and disruption within the government administration. As stated before, the second reason for JFK's assassination was his intention to eliminate the Federal Reserve. Colonel James Gritz explains, "When Kennedy called for the return of America's currency to the gold standard and the dismantling of the Federal Reserve System, he actually minted non-debt money, which does not bear the mark of the Federal Reserve when he dared to exercise the leadership authority granted to him by the US Constitution." After the planned withdrawal from Vietnam and dismantling of the Federal Reserve System, which is not controlled by the US government and too often manipulates United States policy, JFK was a marked man. He further infuriated the Vatican with his separation of church and state speech.
I believe in an America where the separation of church and state is absolute, where no Catholic prelate would tell the president, should he be Catholic, how to act.
Kennedy was one of many presidents, kings, czars and emperors who refused to obey the Jesuits and was killed for it. The role of the papacy in the heinous murder and cover-up of this crime cannot be denied. The Vatican had the motive, the people in key positions to carry it out, and the people in key positions to cover it up. The Jesuits control the major secret societies, including Freemasonry, Skull and Bones, as well as Roman Catholic secret societies such as the Knights of Malta and the Knights of Columbus. The last three generations of the Bush family belong to Skull and Bones and are subservient to the papacy. Here we see George H.W. Bush also in Dallas on that tragic day when JFK was gunned down. Let's take a look at some of the people who were in key positions at the time of the assassination. Lyndon B. Johnson was Vice President and a Freemason. He was subservient to Jesuit-controlled elite after he was sworn in as US President following the death of JFK. Allen Dulles was a Knight of Malta and CIA Director from 1953 to 61. JFK fired Allen Dulles as CIA Director for the mishandling of the Bay of Pigs invasion and insubordination to himself. JFK stated that he wanted to splinter the CIA into 1,000 pieces and scatter it unto the winds. On November the 29th, 1963, President Lyndon Johnson appointed Allen Dulles to one of 7 commissioners of the Warren Commission to investigate the assassination of the US President John F. Kennedy. The appointment was later criticised by some historians, who noticed that Kennedy had fired him and therefore he was unlikely to be impartial in passing judgment charged the Warren Commission. Allen Dulles' nephew Avery Dulles was a Roman Catholic cardinal and Jesuit priest. John McCone was the replacement of Allen Dulles as CIA director from 1961 to 65, and was also a member of Roman Catholic secret society Knights of Columbus. McGeorge Bundy was the United States Security Advisor. He was a member of Skull and Bones. George H.W. Bush was, in Dallas, seemingly nervous in his body language, and he too is a member of Skull and Bones. John Edgar Hoover was director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation and a Freemason. James Rowley, whose brother Francis was a Jesuit priest, was director of the US Secret Service from 1961 to 73 and was responsible for the security of JFK. Here we see the confusion, as the Secret Service are now ordered to stand down as the President drives into the line of fire. Normally the Secret Service would be riding on the back of the limousine, which has foot platforms and handles, as seen in this picture. The Secret Service driver William Greer made an almost complete stop in front of a gutter drain, which mainstream documentaries and accounts will never reveal. After the other assassins had failed to deliver a fatal headshot, and the last assassin hidden in the drain was successful, the Mafia too, no doubt, had a part to play in the assassination of JFK, as the CIA has worked with them on many occasions, and the Mafia gave plausible deniability to the power elite if the operation ever came undone.
People have given me a hearing without legal representation or anything. You shoot the president? I didn't shoot anybody, no, sir.
Hold it down. Has the gentleman been identified?
Yes, sir. He's been identified for killing the officer.
Right. Has any identification been attempted for the killing of the president?
Not yet.
Did you shoot the president? I didn't shoot anybody, sir. I haven't been told what I'm here for.
You have a lawyer?
No, sir, I don't.
I'd like legal representation. These police officers have not allowed me to have any.
I don't know what this is all about.
Kill the president?
No, sir, I didn't. People keep asking me that. Sir?
Did you shoot the president?
I work in that building.
Were you in the building at the time?
Naturally, if I work in that building, yes, sir.
Back up, man. Did you shoot the president?
No, they're taking me in because of the fact that I lived in the Soviet Union. I'm just a patsy.
For we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies primarily on covert means for expanding its sphere of influence, on infiltration instead of invasion, on subversion instead of elections, on intimidation instead of free choice. It is a system which has conscripted vast human and material resources into the building of a tightly knit, highly efficient machine that combines military, diplomatic, intelligence, economic, scientific, and political operations. Its preparations are concealed, not published. Its mistakes are buried, not headlined. Its dissenters are silenced, not praised. No rumor is printed, no secret is revealed.
When the United States rules the world, the Catholic Church will rule the world. Nothing can stand against the Church. I'd like to see the politician who would try to rule against the Church in Chicago. His reign would be short indeed. Archbishop Quigley, 1903, The Chicago Tribune. The founders of the CIA, which replaced the OSS, Office of Strategic Services, were Harry Truman, a Freemason, Allen Dulles, Knights of Malta, and William J. Donovan, who is also a member of Knights of Malta. Even though Dulles was said to be a Presbyterian, which no doubt gave him more cover, many, if not all, CIA directors since the creation of the CIA have had a Jesuit education or some connection to a secret society, Jesuit priest or advisor. Leaders of governments know very well a shadow government is watching, waiting for the right time to strike, gaining ground inch by inch, controlling men of influence and power by force, threat, intimidation or bribe. Even as US economic competitors such as the European Union were on the verge of disbanding, United States President Barack Obama strongly encouraged and advised the EU to forge ahead, expanding and consolidating European nations into one political and economic superstate. So it is evident that the United States government is not necessarily representing American interests of we the people, but rather we the powerful undercurrent of globalist elite. Many argue that a new world order will prevent wars between nations and make the distribution of food and resources more manageable. Hitler had the same goal. Totalitarianism always ends in the systematic abuse of the masses. George Orwell's novel 1984 is a fictitious story, first published in 1949, about a totalitarian regime which kept citizens in a state of fear under the facade of endless war. 1984 has an uncanny resemblance to what is slowly happening to our society: pervasive government surveillance, arbitrary detainment, and torture and mass media conditioning of the masses to a certain way of thinking. What Napoleon Bonaparte and Adolf Hitler failed to do in the quest for the unification of Europe, the European Union succeeded in doing through trade and diplomacy. As you can see, the EU headquarters building is nothing more than a replica of the Tower of Babel, giving the effect of incompletion. The Tower of Babel signifies the collective concentration of apostasy against divine statues by many nationalities. As the advertisement poster states, many tongues, one voice, with 11 visible pentagram stars of the 12 that are thought to conjure up satanic power in the occult, and the 12th star is said to be hidden behind the structure. The North Atlantic Treaty Organization, better known by its acronym NATO, is a multinational force designed and thought necessary to counter the military power of the USSR, communism in Western Europe, and nationalist militarism. Now that the Cold War is over with the Soviet Union, the new goal is the domination of Eurasia, outflanking Russia and halting any plans of Russian imperialism. NATO is now more or less an instrument of elite think tank groups such as the Bilderberg Group. The strongest influence within this military machine seems to be the United States, as the United Kingdom, France and Germany have a lesser but significant say. Gladio was a clandestine operation grafted into NATO a year after its creation in 1949. Many dictators and ancient superpowers have had the same ambition of world domination, such as the Babylonians, Egyptians, Medes and Persians, ancient Greece and the Roman Empire, and last of all, the Roman Catholic Church, which is simply a continuation of the Roman Empire that was authorized by the Byzantine or Eastern Roman Emperor Justinian I, 527 to 565 AD, after the demise of Western Rome. Eventually, the Roman Catholic Church was subdued by Napoleon's general in 1798, ending 1260 years of papal rule. Historians believe that the Roman Catholic Church killed upward of 50 million people. Later in history, the independent Vatican City-State was established in 1929 by the Lateran Treaty, signed by Cardinal Secretary of State Pietro Gaspari on behalf of Pope Pius XI, and by Prime Minister Benito Mussolini on behalf of King Victor Emmanuel III of Italy. Since 1929, the papacy has gathered momentum, and today is the most powerful organization on the planet. Vatican rule and infiltration is a growing concern within many countries. Every Catholic has a responsibility, obeying the Pope before king, president or country. So more often than not, a conflict of interest arises when a practicing Catholic holds any public or political office. In past history, the papacy used the armies of rulers and kings to procure her agenda and establish papal supremacy, most probably because of the cost. Some examples are King Clovis I, who enforced Catholicism with an iron fist, uniting the Frankish tribes, and King Philip II of Spain on the orders of Pope Sixtus V, sailing his armada to conquer rebellious Protestant England. The St. Bartholomew's Day massacre and many more examples are all indictments against the papacy's religio-political agenda controlling kings. The Catholic Church has infiltrated the highest levels of government in many nations via the Roman Catholic secret societies such as the Jesuits, Knights of Malta, Opus Dei, Knights of Columbus and laymen too. However, the Jesuits knew that if they could commandeer agencies like the CIA, NSA, the FBI, the Secret Service, as well as placing Jesuit-trained and influenced directors in military and defence roles, the Vatican could ultimately control the US government, coercing other nations to comply with the implementation of the Vatican's New World Order. The Society of Jesus, better known as the Jesuit Order, is the right arm of the Catholic Church. The Jesuits were approved by Pope Paul III in 1540 to counteract the Reformation, but grew more powerfully pervasive than the Roman Catholic Church itself. The Illuminati were simply members of the Jesuit order who were disenfranchised from the Roman Catholic Church when Pope Clement XIV, by the brief Dominus ac Redemptor, suppressed the Jesuits on the 21st of July 1773. This was under the pressure of leaders of European nations for subversive actions against the state. The Illuminati was simply the Jesuits resurrected under a new guise and a new name. Some years later, the monarchs that instigated the suppression of the Jesuits were no longer ruling because of political revolutions that the Jesuits had conceived under the guise of the Illuminati. Pope Pius VII restored the Jesuit order to its preeminence in 1814. The Jesuits simply kept the Illuminati as a secret society controlling secular society, including education, Greek letter organisations like Phi Beta Kappa, Kappa Alpha Society and Delta Phi, and other secret societies such as Skull and Bones and Freemasonry. Now the Jesuits controlled both spheres, Christianity and secularism. The Jesuit order was extremely successful in its counter-reformation against Protestantism, as well as stamping out any papal dissent ignited by Martin Luther, who nailed the 95 Theses to the Wittenberg Castle door in 1517. But the Jesuit war against Protestantism has been going on for centuries, even landing on the shores of the United States of America, which was deemed a Protestant nation.
President Washington, that was the first president to be utilized by the Jesuits. If you were not aware of that, President Washington already was initiated by the Jesuits to bring about the first communication with the Vatican ever known in this country. From there on, President Reagan, throughout all this time, President Reagan has come to fulfill the greatest moment in the history of this conspiracy, because no other president has come as close as President Reagan brought about several things. One of them is the diplomatic relationship with the Vatican. Second, the preparation for the signature of a concordat between the Vatican and the United States. And if you want to know, this never took place overnight. President Reagan was prepared and initiated for the task that is performing today as President of the United States by the Jesuits of Rome, and the time that he served as a star in a movie that was very well known and still being shown today, a very old movie about the football team of Notre Dame. New Blockney. That's correct. This is the time that the first contact was made by the Jesuits with Reagan.
When Ronald Reagan opened diplomatic relations with the Vatican State on January the 10th, 1984, something that the American people had contested in former years because of the contrast between the United States, a nation of religious liberty, and Vatican City, a dictatorial state that claimed fascism to be more in line with her political thinking and tyranny of religious freedom. In 1989, the tearing down of the Berlin Wall was an example of the intimacy of the US-Vatican merger, with Pope John Paul II influencing both the fall of the Berlin Wall and the end of the Soviet Union, which had long been opposed to Roman Catholicism and the United States during the Cold War. Time magazine published an article on the 24th of February 1992 about the alliance between the Pope and Ronald Reagan, President of the United States, ushering in a new era of US-Vatican relations. Henry Luce, a co-founder of Time magazine, was also a member of the Roman Catholic secret society Knights of Malta. The other founder died at a very young age, soon after the creation of the magazine.
I thought that it was a matter of real concern that planted stories intended to serve a national purpose abroad came home and were circulated here and believed here, because this would mean that the CIA could manipulate the news in the United States by channeling it through some foreign country. Now we're looking at that very carefully.
Do you have any people being paid by the CIA who are contributing to a major circulation American journal?
We do have people who submit pieces to American journals.
Do you have any people paid by the CIA who are working for television networks?
This, I think, gets into the kind of getting into the details, Mr. Chairman, that I'd like to get into in executive session.
At CBS, we had been contacted by the CIA. As a matter of fact, by the time I became the head of the whole news and public affairs operation in 1954, the ships had been established, and I was told about them and asked if I'd carry on with them.
We have quite a lot of detailed information, and we will evaluate it, and we will include any evidence of wrongdoing or any evidence of impropriety in our final report and make recommendations.
Do you have any people being paid by the CIA who are contributing to the national news services, AP and UPI?
Well, again, I think we're getting into the kind of detail, Mr. Chairman, that I'd prefer to handle in executive session.
Senator, do you think that you named the news organizations in your final report?
That remains to be decided.
I think it was entirely in order for our correspondents at that time to make use of CIA agent chiefs of station and other members of the executive staff of CIA as sources of information which were useful in their assessments of world conditions.
Would you say that continues today?
Well, I would think probably for a reporter it would continue today, but because of all of the revelations of the period of the 1970s, it seems to me that a reporter's got to be much more circumspect in doing it now, or he runs the risk of at least being looked at with considerable disfavor by the public. I think you've got to be much more careful about it.
How has the CIA interfered in the American film industry since the Cold War era till today? What Hollywood films have come to market carrying the CIA's message and offering a vicious and extreme image of America's enemies? Who are the enemies? Who are targeted for destruction by the American agents? In 1917, when the United States entered World War I, President Woodrow Wilson's Committee on Public Information enlisted the aid of America's film industry to making training films and features supporting the cause. George Creel, chairman of the CPI, believed that the movies had a role in carrying the gospel of Americanism to every corner of the globe. The Federal Bureau of Investigation established an office in the 1930s to bolster its image in radio programs, films, and television shows. In 1947, the Department of Defense followed suit, and now the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, the Marine Corps, the Coast Guard, the Department of Homeland Security, and the Secret Service all have motion picture and television officers or official assistants to the media on their payroll. During World War II, Hollywood's contribution was to provide propaganda.
Hollywood's most famous movie stars leave the film capital to help the government sell war bonds. Irene Dunn, Ronald Colman, Hedy Lamarr, Greer Garson, all part of a contingent of some 50 screen celebrities giving their time and talents to aid the national war effort. The country has asked the people to invest $1 billion in 1 month to help pay for the war. And here's the start of the drive. Boarding a special train for Washington, they'll tour 300 cities from coast to coast. Go to any city that agrees to subscribe at least $1 million.
Buy a bond, and by, the bonds you buy'll bring you victory.
After the war, Washington reciprocated by using subsidies, special provisions in the Marshall Plan, and general clout to pry open resistant European film markets.
Every society to some degree has, structural elements that want a particular representation of the individuals in society. The CIA's involvement in Hollywood goes all the way back to, not only Hollywood, it really starts in the media. In 1953, Alan Dulles created a department that wanted to really influence the media and the CIA. Carl Bernstein, of the famous Woodward and Bernstein journalist who exposed Watergate, he was actually the co-winner of the Pulitzer Prize in, I believe, 1973. In 1977, I believe, he published an article about 20,000 to 25,000 words titled "The CIA and the Media," and this was actually published in Rolling Stone magazine in 1977, and it really disclosed the sleight of hand that Hollywood had in influencing the media as a whole. Now, eventually, this would lend itself to Hollywood for obvious reasons, but there was actually in the 70s, Senator Frank Church headed a committee, the Senate Intelligence Committee, to actually look into the involvement, the extent of the involvement in the CIA in the media. We had William Colby and George Bush Sr. Come out and actually, sort of thwarted the investigation, and their logic was, their reasoning was that this would disclose some highly sensitive information. It would not be right for national security. A lot of the same issues we see going on today.
It is evident that the CIA promotes Catholicism through Hollywood. America is a predominantly Protestant country at 51%, with Roman Catholicism at 23%. One only has to think back to the overwhelming majority of Hollywood films involving Catholic priests. Public relations nightmare of Pope Benedict XVI and the ever-declining popularity of the Roman Catholic Church due to scores of sexual abuse cases, the Jesuits were summoned, and Pope Francis was elected, the first Jesuit to be elected pontiff. An Opus Dei member, Greg Burke, who'd previously served as a correspondent for both Fox News and Time magazine, was appointed the public relations advisor to Pope Francis. Ever since, Pope Francis has participated in cheap gimmicks and public displays of charity that have swayed public opinion to proclaim Pope Francis as the people's Pope.
When we die, Father, is nothing left. Ever since I was a child, I had a feeling that something is missing in me. I want to know why I am here. Can any of us know that? Become yourself. Then God and the devil don't matter. I want to learn. I want to understand. Be careful. Can you find the force to enable these two quite opposite lives to live together in yourself? At any moment, the wolf can devour the lamb, and you must learn what it means to become responsible.
Zimbabwean dictator Robert Mugabe was raised a Roman Catholic and educated at Jesuit schools. One of the world's most prolific authors had this to say on the Jesuits: "There was no crime too great for them to commit, no deception too base for them to practice, no disguise too difficult for them to assume. Vowed to perpetual poverty and humility, it was their studied aim to secure wealth and power, to be devoted to the overthrow of Protestantism and the re-establishment of the papal supremacy. When appearing as members of their order, they wore a garb of sanctity, visiting prisons and hospitals, ministering to the sick and poor, professing to have renounced the world, and bearing the sacred name of Jesus, who went about doing good." But under this blameless exterior, the most criminal and deadly purposes were often concealed. It was a fundamental principle of the order that the end justifies the means. By this code, lying, theft, perjury, assassination were not only pardonable, but commendable when they served the interests of the Church. Under various disguises, the Jesuits worked their way into offices of state, climbing up to be the counsellors of kings and shaping the policy of nations. They became servants to act as spies upon their masters. They established colleges for the sons of princes and nobles, and schools for the common people, and the children of Protestant parents were drawn into an observance of popish rites. The Great Controversy, Ellen G. White. The Black Pope, the office of Superior General of the Jesuits has been said to be the most powerful man in the world. Currently, he is Adolfo Nicolas, who lived and taught theology in Asia, so a Jesuit goal at this time would be the subjection of Asia. At the time of 9/11, Adolfo Nicolas' predecessor, Peter Hans Kolvenbach, was Superior General of the Jesuits, as he was a specialist in the Middle East that they needed. Jesuit priest Malachi Martin wrote in his book, The Keys of This Blood, that he identifies the last decades of the 20th century as the end game of the New World Order. 9/11 was an extremely suspicious event. The many inconsistencies, such as molten iron seen spewing out the sides of the building, seen in controlled demolitions when using thermite, and the squibs, also a telltale sign of controlled demolition. There were also many private videos and conflicting statements by witnesses that made the official story unconvincing. The people in power were all subservient to the Vatican. General Michael Hayden, Jesuit educated at De Quincy, George Tenet, Jesuit educated at Georgetown, George H. Bush, who bows down to the Pope, and seen here giving George Tenet a medal for the biggest intelligence blackout in history. Donald Rumsfeld attended Jesuit Georgetown University. NORAD, North American Aerospace Defense Command, is directed by Roman Catholic Ralph Eberhard, and was criticized by Senator Mark Dayton, saying, "This country and its citizens were completely undefended for 109 minutes.
On the morning of September 11, 2001, 19 men armed with box cutters, directed by a man on dialysis in a cave fortress halfway around the world using a satellite phone and a laptop, directed the most sophisticated penetration of the most heavily defended airspace in the world, overpowering the passengers and the military combat-trained pilots on 4 commercial aircraft before flying those planes wildly off course for over an hour without being molested by a single fighter interceptor. These 19 hijackers, devout religious fundamentalists who like to drink alcohol, snort cocaine, and live with pink-haired strippers, managed to knock down 3 buildings with 2 planes in New York. While in Washington, a pilot who couldn't handle a single-engine Cessna was able to fly a 757 in an 8,000-foot descending 270-degree corkscrew turn to come exactly level with the ground, hitting the Pentagon in the Budget Analyst Office, where DoD staffers were working on the mystery of the $2.3 trillion that Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld had announced missing from the Pentagon's coffers in a press conference the day before, on September 10, 2001. Luckily, the news anchors knew who did it within minutes.
Osama bin Laden.
The pundits knew within hours.
Osama bin Laden.
The administration knew within the day.
Terrorists who committed these acts and those who harbor them.
And the evidence literally fell into the FBI's lap.
That a hijacker's passport was found blocks from the World Trade Center crash site, if you can believe that.
But for some reason, a bunch of crazy conspiracy theorists demanded an investigation into the greatest attack on American soil in history. That investigation was delayed, underfunded, set up to fail, a conflict of interest, and a cover-up from start to finish. It was based on testimony extracted through torture, the records of which were destroyed. It failed to mention the existence of WTC-7, Able Danger, P-TECH, Sibel Edmonds, OBL and the CIA, and the drills of hijacked aircraft being flown into buildings that were being simulated at the precise same time that those events were actually happening. It was lied to by the Pentagon, the CIA, the Bush administration, and as for Bush and Cheney, well, no one knows what they told it because they testified in secret, off the record, not under oath, and behind closed doors. It didn't bother to look at who funded the attacks because that question is ultimately of little practical significance. Still, the 9/11 Commission did brilliantly, answering all of the questions the public had, except most of the victims' family members' questions, and pinned blame on all the people responsible, although no one so much as lost their job, determining the attacks were
failure of imagination.
Because
nobody in our government, at least, and I don't think the prior government that could envision flying airplanes into buildings.
Except the Pentagon, FEMA, NORAD, and the NRO. The DIA destroyed 2.5 terabytes of data on Able Danger, but that's okay because it probably wasn't important. The SEC destroyed their records on the investigation into the insider trading before the attacks, but that's okay because destroying the records of the largest investigation in SEC history is just part of routine record keeping. NIST has classified the data that they used for their model of WTC-7's collapse, but that's okay because knowing how they made their model of the collapse would jeopardize public safety. The FBI has argued that all material related to their investigation of 9/11 should be kept secret from the public, but that's okay because the FBI probably has nothing to hide. This man never existed, nor is anything he had to say worthy of your attention, and if you say otherwise, you are a paranoid conspiracy theorist and deserve to be shunned by all of humanity. Likewise him, and her, and her, and her, and him. Osama bin Laden lived in a cave fortress in the hills of Afghanistan, but somehow got away. Then he was hiding out in Tora Bora, but somehow got away. Then he lived in Abbottabad for years, taunting the most comprehensive intelligence dragnet, employing the most sophisticated technology in the history of the world for a decade, releasing video after video with complete impunity and getting younger and younger as he did so, before finally being found in a daring SEAL team raid which wasn't recorded on video, in which he didn't resist or use his wife as a human shield, and in which these crack special forces operatives panicked and killed this unarmed man, supposedly the best source of intelligence about those dastardly terrorists on the entire planet. Then they dumped his body in the ocean before telling anyone about it. Then a couple dozen of that team's members died in a helicopter crash in Afghanistan. This is the story of 9/11, brought to you by the media which told you the hard truth.
Every CIA director since 9/11 has been Jesuit trained and have employed the subjugation of nations, building a case to wage war in the Middle East in an effort to neutralize Muslims and to control resources, furthering the New World Order.
About 10 days after 9/11, I went through the Pentagon and I saw Secretary Rumsfeld and Deputy Secretary Wolfowitz. I went downstairs just to say hello to some of the people on the Joint Staff who had used to work for me, and one of the generals called me in. He said, "Sir, you got to come in and talk to me a second." I said, "Well, you're too busy." He said, No. He says, "We've made the decision. We're going to war with Iraq." This was on or about the 20th of September. I said, "We're going to war with Iraq? Why?" He said, "I don't know." He said, "I guess they don't know what else to do." So I said, "Well, did they find some information connecting Saddam to Al-Qaeda?" He said, No. He says, "There's nothing new that way. They just made the decision to go to war with Iraq." He said, "I guess it's like we don't know what to do about terrorists, but we've got a good military and we can take down governments." And he said, "I guess if the only tool you have is a hammer, every problem has to look like a nail." So I came back to see him a few weeks later, and by that time we were bombing in Afghanistan. I said, "Are we still going to war with Iraq?" And he said, "Oh, it's worse than that." He said, he reached over on his desk, he picked up a piece of paper, he said, I just got this down from upstairs," meaning the Secretary of Defense's office today, and he said, "This is a memo that describes how we're going to take out 7 countries in 5 years, starting with Iraq and then Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and finishing off Iran."
Speculation has been raised on the reasons for NATO's intervention in Libya. And as RT's Laura Emmett reports, the organisation may have been trying to prevent Gaddafi from burying the American buck.
According to some, it's about protecting civilians.
We must not tolerate this regime using military force against its own people.
Others say it's about oil.
The only reason they're interested with Libya is about the oil. You'd think we'd be in Iraq if the major export there was broccoli.
But some are convinced intervention in Libya is all about currency, specifically Gaddafi's plan to introduce the gold dinar, a single African currency made from gold, a true sharing of the wealth.
It's one of these things that you have to plan almost in secret, because as soon as you say you're going to change over from the dollar to something else, you're going to be targeted. There were 2 conferences on this, one in 96 and another one in the year 2000, called the World Mataba Conference, organized by Gaddafi. And everybody was interested. I think most countries in Africa were keen.
Gaddafi didn't give up. In the months leading up to the military intervention, he called on African and Muslim nations to join together to create this new currency that would rival the dollar and euro. They would sell oil and other resources around the world only for gold dinars. It's an idea that would shift the economic balance of the world. Countries' wealth would depend on how much gold they have, not how many dollars they trade. And Libya has 144 tons of gold. The UK has double that, but 10 times the population.
If Gaddafi had an intent to try to reprice his oil or whatever else the country was selling in the global markets and accept something else as a currency, or maybe launch a gold dinar currency, any move such as that would certainly not be welcomed by the power elite today who are responsible for controlling the world's central banks. So yes, that would certainly be something that would cause his immediate dismissal and the need for other reasons to be brought forth for removing him from power.
It's happened before. In 2000, Saddam Hussein announced Iraqi oil would be traded in euros, not dollars. Sanctions and an invasion followed. Some say because the Americans were desperate to prevent OPEC from transferring oil trading in all its member countries to the euro.
The UK's gold is kept here in a secure vault somewhere in the depths of the Bank of England. As in most developed countries, there's not enough to go around. But that's not the case in places like Libya and many of the Gulf states. A gold dinar would have given oil-rich African and Middle Eastern countries the power to turn around to their energy-hungry customers and say, sorry, the price has gone up and we want gold. Some say the US and its NATO allies literally couldn't afford to let that happen.
Ex-Jesuit priest Dr. Alberto Rivera explained that the secret sign that Protestantism has been wiped out was when a president of the US took his oath facing an obelisk. In 1981, the swearing-in of Ronald Reagan as president was moved to the west front of the Capitol, and he was sworn in as president facing an obelisk. Protestantism had effectually been wiped out, and the Jesuits had control of America. Candidates running for US presidency know very well who must be appeased. The Roman Catholic Church and the Jesuit-influenced globalists often groom and elect presidents without the knowledge of the public, as sometimes votes are often manipulated from behind the scenes as well. The mighty and widely ramified Order of St. Ignatius was powerful enough to procure by its interests far greater advantages to individuals than could any other corporation, fraternity, or even secular power. Jesuit General Jean-Baptiste Janssens. Globalists always have their finger on the pulse and emotions of people all over the world, especially within the United States, thanks to psychologists, social engineers working behind the scenes. Barack Obama was elected when US citizens were wearied by war and the financial crisis of 2008. People were desperate for change, and that was exactly the angle globalists sold their CIA Jesuit-trained president to America. Barack Obama was groomed for the presidency by the Jesuits, and his mentor Jesuit priest Gregory Galuzzo is still influencing Obama.
And does he keep in contact with the organisation now?
You know, once he became a U.S. Senator, he's very much in demand. So it's only on occasion we get to interact with him.
Well, an occasion is fine, isn't it?
Obama has appointed many Jesuit-educated individuals to positions of power. According to Obama's paternal grandmother, he was born in Mombasa, Kenya. Later, he was enrolled in an Indonesian public school, as he was a citizen of Indonesia, where he learned to recite the Muezzin call to prayer in a perfect Arabic accent. Obama then went to an Indonesian Franciscan Roman Catholic school. Many years after Obama moved to Hawaii, he met Frank Marshall Davis, who was a member of the Communist Party USA. Frank Davis trained Obama in Stalinist Marxism, and Obama then went to Harvard, as his fees were paid for by the father of a member of the Black Panthers, who were dedicated to a global international communist revolution. After Obama went to Chicago as a community activist, he became good friends with Bill Ayers, who was the co-founder of the Weather Underground, a communist revolutionary group. Bill Ayers was on the terrorist watch list. Finally, Obama arrived at the Jesuit-run Gamaliel Foundation, where he's hand-picked for his many talents and his ethnic and religious background.
When you go to other countries, the political divisions are so much more stark and wider. Here in America, the difference between Democrats and Republicans, we're fighting inside the 40-yard line. Maybe
you fooled most people on that in the last few months, I'd say.
No, I would distinguish between the rhetoric and the tactics versus the ideological differences. I mean, in most countries, you've got, people call me a socialist sometimes, but no, you got to meet real socialists. You'll have a sense of what a socialist is.
Karl Marx, as discussed earlier, only refined socialism-communism, which the Jesuits had developed in Paraguay from 1600 to 1750. This required implementing the teachings of both Plato, who wrote Plato's Republic, and Thomas More, who wrote Utopia, and the Jesuits tested their communist ideology on the South American Indians. As we have said before, the Vatican is more aligned with fascism due to the structure of nationalist militarism and the proposed amalgamation of church and state. But a different style of communism could be sufficient for the papal agenda of world domination. Zbigniew Brzezinski, who had a Jesuit education, stated that he is not entirely against communism, but only the Soviet model, perhaps because this model leaves no room for religion. He discussed the circumstances in which it could be possible for the Soviet Union to rejoin the Western Marxist tradition. Note that he didn't say they would become constitutionalists and celebrate property rights and freedom. The point is they would join with the other types of Marxists in the West, who now have positions of power, but they don't tell anyone they're Marxists. So you may now understand that Obama had exactly the right credentials to be elected president for the era of change and the meshing of a capitalist, Marxist, fascist New World Order. In other words, state capitalism, with an authoritarian, yet thuggish, twist. Obama's use of cunning and indirect strategy uses a more modern form of Jesuitical tactics, by conducting many assassinations by drones instead of the direct confrontational military action like the Bush-Cheney administration. Obama uses the method of regime change by coup d'etat, destroying the state from within, often training and funding rebels. Obama has signed unconstitutional laws into effect, like the NDAA crafted by Jesuit-trained Professor Viet Din, that effectively makes it possible to detain someone without charge or trial.
Your elected officials, both the Senate and the House of Representatives, have just overwhelmingly passed the National Defense Authorization Act. Squeezed into this military funding bill are two provisions that give the military not just lots and lots of money, but lots and lots of power as well, through two very controversial provisions. One expands the use of military force in Afghanistan to include indefinite detention of anyone suspected of being a member of Al-Qaeda or, quote, associated forces. So, essentially, anyone. But here's the big one, folks. It gives the military the power to indefinitely detain American citizens, even those captured here in the United States.
The Vatican, when she asserted power over the European nations from 538 AD to 1798 AD, exerted the same tactics of indefinite detention. The US government has no pangs of conscience using rectal hydration and waterboarding as a torture, extracting confessions. The very same tortures were used during the Spanish Inquisition in the 1500s by the Roman Catholic Church. So naturally, the Roman Catholic-controlled CIA brings the very same method back into play. CIA secret prisons have been exposed around the world, inflicting the heinous inquisitional forms of torture. Here is a map of countries that are complicit in the illegal detainment and torture of prisoners. Simon Perez recently stated that Pope Francis is more of a powerful peace advocate than the United Nations. So the relationship exists between the Zionist Jews and the Roman Catholic Church on many levels, as the common thread of Islam makes the Vatican and Zionist Israel unlikely bed partners. Israel procures favours of national security from Jesuit proxies and US government, not to mention nefarious business deals, as Jewish politicians do the bidding of New World Order advocates. Let us not forget that the Rothschilds are the guardians of the Vatican finance and treasury.
Mr. Rothschild, how you doing, sir? Can you tell us what went on at the Bilderberg meeting this year?
Sorry?
Can you tell us what went on at the Bilderberg meeting this year?
I didn't get that, actually, no.
The Bilderberg? You weren't there?
No.
Not this year. What went on last year?
No, I wasn't there last year. I think that was my cousin.
Your cousin was there?
Yeah, I think so. Okay.
Do you have a couple minutes for us, Mr. Rothschild?
We have a few additional questions. I was asking a question inside because I was saying that the Federal Reserve was one of these organizations. One of these organizations that a lot of people say was the source of main projects all across the world because it's a private bank that was started by your family.
No, it's completely untrue. I was asked that earlier. It really isn't true. No.
Jekyll Island? Jekyll Island, 1913, sir? I mean, but sir, just one thing, we could go on about how, your family committed all these acts against society, but we just want to let you know, the New World Order has no legitimacy.
and that we as a people are not afraid, and we are waking up to the robber barons and the big banksters who are looting this economy with the Federal Reserve.
Well,
the document Protocols of Zion is singled out as the reason why Zionist Jews are responsible for the evils existing within the world. However, since this document just appeared out of thin air, many suspect it was meticulously construed to keep the Jesuits out of the limelight. Dr. Lehman uses his method of an anonymous document is best discovered by the document itself, by the cause it favours, convincingly demonstrating that this sinister document must have been forged by the Catholics, specifically by the Special Forces Order within Catholicism, the Jesuits. Zionism actually has little to do with Jewry. Here we see Orthodox Jews protesting against it. It would be more realistic to acknowledge Zionists as proxies of the Jesuits and involved in a symbiotic relationship. While Jews do hold many positions in the finance sectors like the Federal Reserve and banking, the majority of positions in media, government, military and business are held by Roman Catholics or those who have connections with the Vatican. Here we see DHS Executive Chair Johnson at a Jesuit university. Janet Napolitano was also educated at a Jesuit university, and Michael Chertoff, the US Secretary of Homeland Security, is a Jew who, like most Zionist Jews, is subservient to the original Men in Black, the Jesuits. Michael Chertoff was the co-author of the Patriot Act. Michael Chertoff's wife, Meryl, is a professor of law at Georgetown Jesuit University.
Hi, I'm Janet Napolitano, Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security. Homeland Security begins with hometown security. Report suspicious activity to your local police or sheriff. If you need help, ask a Walmart manager for assistance.
Congress shall now vote for approval of H.R. 8791, the Homeland Terrorism Preparedness Bill. Said bill requests emergency response funding up to and including, this section is classified, dollars to prepare for a national level terrorist attack and or attack from classified. Funding for first responder personnel and vehicles would be doubled if said attack leads to more than 80% of national population being affected by classified. This funding shall commence in conjunction with the first attack on classified, or the first large-scale outbreak of classified, dependent upon which comes first. Civilian and military units shall be trained in containment and combat of classified, including irradiated classified, with possibility of classified airborne, classified flesh-eating, classified, and or all of the above in such event as classified spewing, classified escape, are released or otherwise become uncontrollable. Air Force units may also be directed to combat said classified due to their enormous size and otherworldly strengths. Should event occur in urban areas, that's classified, far surpassing our darkest nightmares. Should casualties exceed classified, body disposal actions shall be halted and associated resources shall be reallocated to classified underground, classified protected birthing centers. A new Bill of Rights shall be drafted and approved by classified. Having now reviewed the bill, I ask you to please cast your votes.
The DHS, like most powerful US agencies, operates as a government within a government, bypassing unconstitutional laws when circumstances permit, such as in a state of emergency, that may have been induced by a false flag operation. Here we see some of the hardware of Homeland Security who obviously see American citizens as a threat. Whistleblower Edward Snowden, an employee of the National Security Agency, released sensitive information unveiling total state and international surveillance of ordinary citizens throughout the world by US intelligence agencies such as the CIA, NSA and their allies such as the United Kingdom's MI6, Canada's CSIS, Australian ASIO and New Zealand NZSIS. These Western intelligence agencies are more or less extensions of the Roman Catholic secret society run CIA, who all work together on a very intimate level.
Activists in Canada are ringing a democracy alarm. The government there has passed an anti-terror bill into law. The law is called C-51, but I'd call it C-1984, and here's why. The law is extremely vague. For instance, advocating terrorism, even when there's no intent to commit a crime or violent act, is an offense. But what exactly does that mean? No idea. Plus, it potentially bans all activism. You're not allowed to question or interfere in the government's affairs at all. Police, they can detain anyone they suspect of being a terrorist, and there's no need to prove a person was going to commit a crime. Intelligence services, well, they can be allowed by courts to breach people's privacy and freedom of expression. Federal departments under the law, they're allowed to share personal information.
Veteran investigative reporter Seymour Hersh has broken some massive stories in his day, but uncovering secret societies within the highest echelons of America's military would probably be the biggest of his career. Seymour Hersh pointed out that General Stanley McChrystal, Vice Admiral William McRaven, and others in the Joint Special Operations Command were members of the Knights of Malta and Opus Dei, two little-known Catholic orders. The Knights of Malta and Opus Dei were instrumental in the war against Islam under the guise of the War on Terror, thanks to 9/11 as the match that set the world ablaze. The Knights of Malta were a Catholic order founded in 1085 as a group of monks who cared for the wounded. It evolved into a military order that safeguarded Christian pilgrims from Muslims during the 9 Crusades, when Europe's Christian states laid siege to Muslims for control of Jerusalem. Opus Dei, popularly depicted in the Hollywood film The Da Vinci Code, was founded in 1928 and officially accepted as part of the Catholic Church in 1947. The group's website claimed their principal calling was to bring about a Christian renewal around the world. It makes good sense that the Vatican has merged with the United States and vice versa for geopolitical stratagem. What other superpower would put the Roman Catholic Church on a pedestal once the New World Order has been established? China, an atheistic communist state? Or Russia, where the Russian Orthodox Church is the official state religion and an historical arch-enemy of the Vatican? The United States has the resources, technology, and the military might with a population of 319 million. The Roman Catholic Church, which has a local branch or church in just about every suburb in almost every country on the planet, which can easily be used for covert activities, influencing the masses and sparking revolutions. The Roman Catholic Church has 1.2 billion members. The combined military and economical might of the United States and Roman Catholic populace make these two forces unstoppable. So much, in fact, that the world has been brought into subjugation, including the 1.6 billion Muslims. The Muslims don't have either the technology or the military might, so it's not hard to guess who will come out on top. Russia and China must also be willing to accept the United States Vatican version of the New World Order. As we have seen in the merger of the Vatican and the United States, instigated by Pope John Paul II, and President Reagan bringing down the Berlin Wall, hastening the collapse of the Soviet Union, we can see the same tactics being employed against the Chinese Communist government.
2014年10月12日 ，2012榮耀盼望信息嘅感言部分，又話牧師分析當前嘅香港形勢，其實就同一啲人所歸納出嚟，美國影子政府製造人民革命、策反各國政府嘅12個步驟相近。
第一，派美國中情局、英國軍情六處等情報人員，以留學生、遊客、義工、商人、記者嘅身份進入目標國家。
第二，以人道目標為理由，開設民主、人權為主旨嘅非政府機構，開展工作之餘，亦都可以招攬一啲崇尚自由同埋理想嘅人。第三，開始喺當地招攬一啲叛徒，尤其係學者、政客、記者、軍人等，可以係賄賂嘅方式，或者係揾出佢哋嘅罪證以控制佢哋。第四，如果目標國家有工會勢力，就會以金錢收買佢哋。第五，為革命創作或者選擇一種象徵顏色或者鮮明嘅口號，例如1968年嘅布拉格之春、1989年東歐嘅天鵝絨革命、2003年格魯吉亞嘅玫瑰革命、2005年黎巴嫩嘅雪橙革命、烏克蘭嘅橙色革命、伊朗嘅綠色革命、
茉莉花革命、
阿拉伯之春，甚至香港嘅雨傘革命。 第六，以唔同名義開始示威，從而展開革命運動。示威嘅名義可以係人權、民主、政府腐敗、選舉舞弊等，唔需要揾出證據，只需要揾到藉口就可以。第七，以英語寫上抗議標語，好讓美國人能夠睇見，咁樣就能夠使到美國政客同埋平民開始發出呼聲。第八，讓之前所收買嘅政客、知識分子、工會領袖等加入示威，並且號召所有對政府唔滿意嘅人加入。第九，美國同埋歐洲嘅主流傳媒配合，不斷強調呢一場革命係因為各種唔公平所導致，從而獲得大多數人嘅支持。第十，當全世界都注視，就製造偽旗行動，拍攝人民被打壓嘅影像，以動搖目標政府，令政府失去人民嘅支持。第11，派出一啲引發暴亂嘅演員，以武力挑釁警方，迫使警方使用武力鎮壓，咁樣就可以使呢個政府失去其他國家嘅支持，被國際社會認為係非法政權。第12，運用政客到美國、歐盟、聯合國等地方陳情，使到目標政府受到國際經濟制裁，設立禁飛區，甚至協助空襲及供應武器俾叛軍。如果上述12個步驟都未能夠成功推翻目標政府，咁樣就讓美國尋找一個藉口作軍事介入，以武力推翻目標國家。事實上，呢12點亦都非常有效同埋成功。2007年，一位曾任北大西洋公約組織 NATO 嘅歐洲盟軍司令部美國退休4星將軍 Wesley Ken Clark 喺一個講座中提及，喺2001年911事件發生後冇幾耐，國防部曾經發出一個指令，就係喺5年內攻擊同埋推翻7個國家，包括伊拉克、黎巴嫩、利比亞、索馬利、蘇丹同埋伊朗。雖然呢個國防計劃並未有喺5年內完成，但係10多年之後，根據呢12個步驟，美國藉住阿拉伯之春同埋反恐戰爭，呢7個國家有啲已經被推翻，有啲陷入內戰，有啲亦都已經係崩潰嘅邊緣。因此，世界局勢、國家嘅被推翻，並唔係人民作出偶然或者自發嘅行動而造成，相反係經過精心策劃同埋計算。事實上，如果要推翻一個國家，以內部革命導致崩潰嘅方式，遠比出兵攻打便宜得多。亦都因此，美國不斷運用呢12個步驟去策反唔同嘅敵對國家。
However, the Chinese government are aware of the power and inner workings of the Vatican. Jesuit missionaries roamed China until the expulsion of all foreign missionaries in 1949. The Chinese government reserves the right to select and approve all Roman Catholic bishops in mainland China, which goes in direct opposition to the Vatican's wishes, and for very good reason. The Vatican is political and has influence over its subjects, instigating and facilitating revolutions. Not since a dispute in 1951 have China and the Vatican had diplomatic relations. The selection of the Roman Catholic cardinals in Hong Kong at this time is under the direction of the Vatican. Pope Benedict XVI appointed Hong Kong Bishop Joseph Zen Zikuan as cardinal on February 22, 2006, but the Chinese government warned that church leaders should not interfere in the country's politics. Anthony Liu, or Liu Bainan, is the honorary chairman of the state-run Chinese Catholic Patriotic Association, and stated that he hoped the appointment would not disrupt social stability in Hong Kong, and that Beijing's position on refraining from establishing diplomatic ties with the Vatican had not changed because of the appointment of Cardinal Zen, who is known for his outspoken appeals for maintaining diplomatic freedoms in Hong Kong and human rights on the mainland. However, lately, human rights violations perpetrated by the United States government exceed those of China. The communist government in China is well aware that the Roman Catholic Church and the United States government work together on many levels, as the CIA uses humanitarian organizations and democracy as weapons to fuel revolution. Russia has its own problems with the United States-Vatican merger, as world leaders distance themselves from Putin and slap sanctions against Russia for reasons that we'll recover later. Jesuit Pope Francis bowed down to dictator Mugabe, but on the 10th of June 2015 sent a very strong psychological message to Putin, further alienating the Russian leader. Here we see Pope Francis pathetically tapping his fingers on the desk across from Putin, psychologically coercing him to toe the line in the New World Order. Jesus had stated, "My kingdom is not of this world," John 18:36. So Christians should not have political ambitions. Yet the Vatican is a religio-political state trying to set up a temporal kingdom here on earth opposed to the true Church of Christ.
If you do not bow down to the Jesuit-controlled Roman Catholic leader, you are a heretic, and you must die. These are the words of the celebrated St. Thomas Aquinas. On the part of the Church, however, there is mercy, which looks to the conversion of the wanderer, wherefore she condemns not at once, but after the first and second admonition, as the Apostle directs. After that, if he is yet stubborn, the Church, no longer hoping for his conversion, looks to the salvation of others by excommunicating him and separating him from the Church, and furthermore delivers him to the secular tribunal to be exterminated thereby from the world by death. During the Chiniquy trial, Abraham Lincoln put Bishop Foley on the stand. The bishop was forced to admit that St. Thomas was looked upon as one of the highest authorities. In fact, the Roman Catholic bishops swore that God himself had inspired what St. Thomas had written about the manner in which heretics should be treated by the Roman Catholics. If the Vatican has its way, the future for all who speak out against the Pope, or who do not go along with the goals of the Jesuits, is one of torture and death. This has been the fate of many world leaders, including presidents in the United States. It has also been the fate of others in all walks of life, like Confederate General Stonewall Jackson, those against the central bank on the Titanic, ex-Jesuit Alberto Rivera. In the Jesuit oath, the Jesuit states, "I will, when opportunity presents, make and wage relentless war, secretly or openly, against all heretics, Protestants, and liberals, as I am directed to do, to extirpate and exterminate them from the face of the whole earth."
Counter-Reformation have set out to destroy the Protestant Reformation, which had a middle class and private rights and private wealth and private land ownership. And in their attempt to bring the world back to the Dark Ages, the 13th century, when Pope Innocent III was the was the demon pope of all of Europe at the time, set out to destroy the Albigenses and others. To do this, to destroy Western Protestant civilization, they had to implement the pillars of the Communist Manifesto. Well, two of those pillars are these. The national credit would be in the hands of the federal government. So therefore, the credit of this country is in the federal government as extended by the Federal Reserve Bank, which is a private bank. Lewis versus U.S. tells us this in a federal case. So this private Federal Reserve Bank, which is controlled by the Vatican, through its various orders, particularly the old crusading orders like the Knights of Malta and the Knights Templars, which are today high-level Freemasons, they have put upon us this horrible Federal Reserve Bank, which is the Pope's bank, to finance all the Pope's crusades since no later than the Spanish-American War of 1898 to the present.
In order to create the central bank, certain obstacles had to be overcome. First, those opposed to a central bank would need to be removed. After many of the leading opponents to a central bank had been removed, the Jesuits moved to obtain passage of the 16th Amendment and the Federal Reserve Act, both in 1913.
So they created the Federal Reserve Bank to finance their crusades. Without the Federal Reserve Bank, there's no war in Iraq. Without the Federal Reserve Bank, there's no World War II. There's no World War I. And there's a book written by Katz called The Money Changers, and in it he says that it's the Federal Reserve Bank and the creators of all this paper currency, fiat money, credit out of thin air. Without that, you don't have these wars. So, we needed the Federal Reserve Bank to create wars on heretic and liberal peoples in Europe so that they could restore the Pope's temporal power throughout the European nations that was being thrown off in the 1800s.
The Jesuits have spent a great deal of time and effort attacking and undermining their number one enemy, the Bible, specifically the King James Bible. As stated in Leone's The Secret Plan, the Jesuits view the Bible as a serpent that must be made into a harmless rod. In an effort to undermine the validity of the Bible, especially the book of Genesis, the Jesuits promoted Charles Darwin's unproven theory of evolution. Evolution theory postulates that man evolved or came about by chance. There was no God or divine agent at work in creating the world. All life had simply developed over time by mutations from a single cell that was formed billions of years ago. Supposedly, man himself had evolved from primitive ape-like creatures to his present state. The evolutionary theory needed proof of its validity. A young Jesuit priest by the name of Pierre Teilhard de Chardin appeared on the scene. In 1912, Teilhard assisted Charles Dawson at the digs in England where the Piltdown Man was discovered. This so-called missing link convinced most of the world that mankind had evolved from more ape-like creatures. It was not until 40 years later that the Piltdown Man was discovered to be a hoax. Philip Johnson, in his book Darwin on Trial, has this to say. Many persons familiar with the evidence, including Stephen Jay Gould and Louis Leakey, have concluded that Teilhard de Chardin was probably culpably involved in preparing the Piltdown fraud. By the time Piltdown Man was exposed, a generation had been indoctrinated into the belief that the evolutionary theory had a solid foundation in science. one of the greatest taboo subjects is to look into who financed Hitler. The answer is clear and easily verified. The Vatican and many of the wealthy elite in the West gave Hitler the money he needed to build the Third Reich. Many do not realize that Prescott Bush, the grandfather of President George W. Bush, and George Herbert Walker, the maternal great-grandfather of President George W. Bush, were Nazi collaborators. Along with Averill Harriman, they set up Union Banking Corporation as a complex money laundering operation for a number of Nazi front businesses. Documents at the National Archives and the Library of Congress show conclusively that Prescott Bush and George Herbert Walker should have been tried for treason because their Nazi dealings continued after the U.S. entered World War II.
They had continued to do business with their primary Nazi patron, who was Fritz Thyssen, who backed Hitler beginning in 1921 and who was the wealthiest man in Germany, and a steel and coal baron who, with his partner Friedrich Flick, essentially built the Nazi war machine along with I.G. Farben. In 1951, when Fritz Thyssen died in Argentina, Union Banking Corporation was liquidated by the U.S. government, and Prescott Bush received $1.5 million for his holdings in his Nazi business, and that was the beginning of the Bush family fortune for all intents and purposes. George Bush doesn't take his philosophical foundation from the Bible or the teachings of Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount. George Bush takes his inspiration from what he learned in Skull and Bones and from the Fool Society that Hitler and Goebbels and Goring cut their teeth in, Bohemian Grove, these evil organizations that perpetrate the ugly things that these criminals are doing to this country, for which they must be held accountable.
The Jesuits created the Illuminati in 1776. The American branch of the Illuminati was called Skull and Bones and has its headquarters at CIA recruiting ground, Yale University. Prescott Bush was a member, as was his son and grandson, President George W. Bush. It is interesting that in the 2004 presidential election, two Skull and Bones members ran against each other.
We were both in Skull and Bones, the secret society. It's so secret we can't talk about it. What does that mean for America? The conspiracy theorists are going to go wild. I'm sure they are. I don't know. I haven't seen the rest. Number 322? First of all, he's not the nominee. And, look, I look forward... Are you prepared to lose? No, I'm not going to lose. You both were members of Skull and Bones, a secret society at Yale. What does that tell us? Not much, because it's a secret. Is there a secret handshake? Is there a secret code? I wish there were something secret I could manifest.
A clip from NBC's Meet the Press program with President Bush.
And we are back in the Oval Office talking to the President of the United States. Mr. President, this campaign is fully engaged. The chairman of the Democratic National Committee, Terrence McAuliffe, said this last week. I look forward to that debate when John Kerry, a war hero with a chest full of medals, is standing next to George Bush, a man who was AWOL in the Alabama National Guard. He didn't show up when he should have showed up. How do you respond?
Political season's here. I was served in the National Guard. I flew F-102 aircraft. I got an honorable discharge. I've heard this ever since I started running for office. I mean, it's I put in my time, proudly so. I would be careful to not denigrate the Guard. It's fine to go after me, which I expect the other side will do. I wouldn't denigrate service to the Guard, though. And the reason I wouldn't is because there's a lot of really fine people who've served in the National Guard and who are serving in the National Guard today in Iraq.
The Boston Globe and the Associated Press have gone through some of the records and said there's no evidence she reported for duty in Alabama during the summer and fall of 1972.
Yeah, they're just wrong. There may be no evidence, but I did report. Otherwise, I wouldn't have been honorably discharged. In other words, you don't just say I did something without there being verification. The military doesn't work that way. I got an honorable discharge, and I did show up in Alabama.
You did. We're allowed to leave 8 months before your term expired. Is there a reason?
Right. Well, I was going to Harvard Business School and worked it out with the military.
When allegations were made about John McCain or Wesley Clark in their military records, they opened up their entire files. Would you agree to do that?
Yeah, listen, these files have been, people have been looking for these files for a long period of time, trust me. And starting in the 1994 campaign for governor. And I can assure you in the year 2000, people were looking for those files as well. Probably you were. And absolutely,
But you allow pay stubs, tax records, anything to show that you were serving during that period?
Yeah. We still have them, but the records are kept in Colorado, as I understand, and they scoured the records. And I'm just telling you, I did my duty, and it's politics to kind of ascribe all kinds of motives to me. But I've been through it before. I'm used to it. What I don't like is when people say serving in the Guard may not be true service.
But you authorize release of everything to settle this.
Absolutely.
Most people are familiar with Hitler's book, Mein Kampf. However, it may surprise many that Hitler did not write the book.
Adolf Hitler was not a writer. Adolf Hitler was a newspaper reader. According to Kurt Kruger's great book, I Was Hitler's Doctor, it was published in 1934, he said that Hitler's lair was just filled with old newspapers, that that's all he ever did was read. It's old newspapers. He was not a writer. He was not a student of history. He was not a student of culture. If you read Mein Kampf, whoever wrote it knew the cultures of many different countries over many different centuries. They knew all about political practices. The writers of Mein Kampf were brilliant. And Mein Kampf, according to Leo Lehman, who was an Irish Roman Catholic priest, who wrote Behind the Dictators in 1942, said that Father Bernard Stampfel was the real author of Mein Kampf.
Adolf Hitler was created to be an instrument of the Jesuits, and like Napoleon, Hitler served his creator well. Millions of the Vatican's enemies were dead, and America forgot George Washington's warnings and abandoned its policy of isolationism. During World War II, the Vatican targeted the Orthodox Christians in Croatia for destruction. As in World War I, the Orthodox Serbians of Croatia suffered again in World War II. A campaign of terror and murder was inflicted on the Serbs by the Croatian Ustaše regime. The leader of the Ustaše was Ante Pavelic, a Roman Catholic. Pavelic and the Ustaše murdered around 500,000 people, while 250,000 were expelled, and another 200,000 were forced to convert to Catholicism. Like the Jewish Holocaust, Pope Pius XII never condemned these atrocities, nor has any pope since then condemned them. Once the war had concluded, the Vatican helped former Nazis escape Germany to safe havens in South America. They even helped Stasi leader Pavelic escape to Argentina.
Pope Pius XII was the Pope who saved hundreds of thousands of Europe's Nazis who passed through Vatican monasteries Dominican, Benedictine, and Jesuit, where they were given shelter, new identities, new passports, sent largely to South America, but there were plenty sent elsewhere, including to the United States, where there was even a program to get the good ones out, Operation Paperclip, which is well known, but Canada let in. And I know this. Mackenzie King let in tons of Nazis who passed through the Vatican monasteries, and this Pope Pius XII could. It's impossible he didn't know about that.
After World War II, a conflict began between the Western powers, mainly the US and Britain, and those of the East, the Soviets and the Chinese. It came to be called the Cold War. From its beginning, the Cold War was a way of keeping the world in chaos and fear, pitting the Christian nations against the communist nations. And most importantly, a way to keep the spotlight off the Vatican. Many people knew of Rome's backing of the Catholic dictators of Europe. They also knew of Rome's aid in helping many of them to escape. The Vatican had not been punished for these crimes. In fact, Pope Pius XII should have stood before the judges at Nuremberg. The Jesuits used the Cold War as an effective diversion for Rome. It worked like a charm. To get it started, a rock in the road had to be removed. That rock was General George S. Patton. At the end of World War II, General George Patton wanted to attack the Soviet Union. Patton saw the menace to the free world communism was, and wanted to go ahead and end it. Patton's conversation to General McNarney in 1945 was revealing. Why do you care what these goddamn Russians think? We are going to have to fight them sooner or later. Why not do it now, while our army is intact, and the damn Russians can have their hind end kicked back into Russia in 3 months? The Jesuits could not allow the Soviet Union to be destroyed. As Robert Wilcox lays out in his book, Target Patton, Roman Catholic William Donovan, head of the OSS, arranged for the assassination of Patton. Patton had survived 3 previous attempts on his life. He also survived the 4th, but was hospitalized. While in the hospital, a refined form of cyanide was given to him that can cause or appear to cause embolisms and heart failure. After making preparations to leave the hospital, Patton's health took a sudden turn for the worse, and he died. The result was that the Jesuits got their Cold War. During the Cold War, the activity of 2 U.S. presidents, John Kennedy and Ronald Reagan, reveals much about the power of the Jesuits. John Kennedy was a Roman Catholic who turned against the Vatican and the Jesuits. Kennedy decided to be his own man, take his own counsel, and not take orders from Rome. He turned out to be a liberal Catholic, which is just as obnoxious to the Vatican as a Protestant or any heretic. Kennedy began to pull out of Vietnam. He ordered the Treasury Department to print money and not go through the privately held Federal Reserve. And he had plans for a new invasion of Cuba.
See, Kennedy wanted Cuba back from Castro. The big lie is that Kennedy, he canceled the orders. He didn't cancel the orders. McGeorge Bundy canceled the order for the air cover in the Bay of Pigs. That's according to Fletcher Prouty in his book JFK. And on the USS Essex, which was an aircraft carrier there, that the captain was told not to give any air cover to the invading patriots there in Cuba. That cover was canceled, not by JFK, because the night before he said he gave a go-ahead. And to prove this point, there's a book that's been released about a year ago called Ultimate Sacrifice, written by Waldron. And in that book, it shows that JFK had planned to invade Cuba on December 1st, 1963, and get rid of that Jesuit, Fidel Castro.